Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast for Backlot Banter, where we review every single Best Picture nominee. And today, we officially close out this year's recap. We are talking about the 10th film on the Best Picture nominee list. That would be James Mangold's A Complete Unknown, starring Timothee Chalamet, Edward Norton, some other people. It's a music biopic, something that the Academy just loves. The Academy just loves these, and we've talked about many of them. So I'm curious to hear how this one compares to perhaps other music biopics, and the rest of the slate from this year, because we're going to have a complete list by the end of this episode, and that is pretty exciting. So I will remind you of what we talked about last time, because you deserve to know. That's the simple truth of it.
You earned it.
We talked about the John M. Chu musical number Wicked. We thought that Wicked, well, it got a 7.0. That'll tell you what we thought. Yeah, pretty good. So unfortunately, 7.0, not quite enough to compete against most of the other films on the list. So it's at spot number 8 out of 9 right now, above Amelia Perez, if you do remember what we gave that film. Yes, we shall see. Complete Unknown, if it passes that, if it's the best musical of this year or not. I don't know. I don't know what the thoughts are going to be on this one. But what I do know is that our community has thoughts, and they write them in the comment box. And Abram's got one for us to listen to and think about right here.
I do. I went back to our review of I'm Still Here, which has gotten just an absolute ton of really lovely and thoughtful, incisive submissions. A lot of them are a little too long to read out here, so I implore you, if you're watching this video, go back and check out those comments in full. But I want to read one here, and I want to preface this comment with perhaps the deepest, most sincere apology I can ever give, because there is a 0% chance I said his name properly.
Oh, I see.
I am going to go with Moraragia. It's all lowercase, which is also making things a little tricky for me. So I'm truly sorry that I don't know how to say your name, your screen name here. Right.
No
but
intercapping crutch to lean on there for you.
Right. So I apologize, but it's a great comment. So it says the following. I feel like if you do not understand what the movie is really about in the context, in parentheses, fight against oblivion, resilience, and compression of feelings in order to shield the children from the horror of dictatorship and how mothers must act this way in these situations, the movie will lose a bit of its appeal. It's not a melodrama. It's not supposed to be filled with grand crying monologues. Rather, it's filled with a quiet, respectful, and raw sense. It's a movie not about the reasons why Rubens was taken and what happened to him, but about the endurance of love through difficult times and how those things should never, ever happen again, because the consequences are real for the families like the Paivas and so many others.
Very nice.
It's a really thoughtful recap here.
Yeah.
So thank you for the comment. And again, thank you very much, Anna, for joining us on the episode. I thought that was a really real treat. And we got some great comments, again, responding to Anna and Anna's family's experience as well. So go check those out. Like I said, it's a really good comment section. It's a nice change of pace.
Yeah. Well,
so.
I did just get the comment on that exact same video saying, Tucker, are you acquainted with other than U.S. movies? Yes.
I didn't say it was a 100% great comment section.
The answer is yes. I reviewed many of them on this channel. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, yes, we thank you.
Tucker, you may have reviewed them, but are you acquainted with them?
Review and acquaint, two different verbs.
All right. Let's acquaint ourselves with Mr. Bob Dylan.
Yes.
Ah, yes.
Tanner, would you do us the favor of describing what happens in this here Bob Dylan flick?
Yeah, absolutely, Timo. So this one starts out in 1961 when a fresh-faced Bob Dylan, or Robert Zimmerman, if you're nasty, arrives in New York City. He's in search of his folk music hero, Woody Guthrie, who is hospitalized. When he arrives at the hospital to, greet Woody Guthrie in his, sort of final years of being broken down by a degenerative illness, he also meets folk hero, folk legend, Pete Seeger. Pete Seeger sort of takes Bob under his wing, guides him up through the, the music landscape, the industry, as it were. Bob Dylan does have quite an effect on people when he gets on stage and performs his songs as one of the most iconic singer-songwriters of the 20th century. And eventually goes on to become quite the hit, the pop, the star in the 1960s. hit that popped the star, I guess. I don't know what I was doing for there.
That's what he became.
The film caps off itself in 1965. We get a couple of these Norfolk, Newport folk festivals.
Yes.
That the Bob performs at, and in the climactic one, he indeed does go electric, marking a new way forward for his musical sensibilities and American music at large.
Whoa.
Tucker, what did you think about this one? You, as I understand it, are less on the musical side of interest and less on the musical songs and on the
Yes.
musical movies. So what did you think of this one?
Yeah, I now have 3 2024 Best Picture nominated musical films that I like. What an interesting coincidence there. I seem to be growing as a
He's
person.
going musical.
3 out of
Yes,
what,
let's
Tucker?
go.
5, 6, 7, 8?
3, Tanner. That is
What?
100% of the musical films nominated for Best Picture from 2024 that I like. And of course, A Complete Unknown is a part of that. And I think this is easily the strongest. And I think we're probably not going to be in very big disagreement here. Easily the strongest of the musical nominated films this year. I really loved A Complete Unknown. I liked it a lot the first time I saw it, but watching it this second time, and being able to pause and take notes and also have subtitles on so I can kind of understand what Bob Dylan is saying a little bit better.
You find it hard to understand?
I was really able to dig into themes and quotes and character moments and little glances that characters give, particularly Bob Dylan. And I just think that this is a really amazing movie. I think it's so thematically rich and lots of interesting ideas about culture and art and performance and identity that are covered. I think it looks amazing. I think the supporting cast especially, and of course, Timothee Chalamet. I think everyone is really fantastic in this movie. Another great Best Picture nominee from the year of our Lord 2024.
There you have it. Abram, what do you think?
I have a question first. What's the third musical nominee? I feel like I'm going
Amelia
crazy.
Perez.
Amelia Perez and Wicked?
No, of course.
Wicked.
And this
Yeah.
one.
Oh, and then the
Completely
one we're
wrong.
reviewing. I kept thinking,
Yeah.
Wicked, Amelia Perez. What's the third one? What's the third one? And I remember.
Is it a musical? Is it a movie about music? Is there a difference,
at a
etc.,
certain point.
etc.? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love this movie a lot. I think so. I've obviously Timothee Chalamet won the SAG award for this role, and he gave what was for some reason a contentious speech.
Yeah, we can talk about it if we want to, but I agree, it's silly, the discourse that has emerged around it.
It's silly. I mean, this is the man who just interviewed Kendrick Lamar. He got up and had his man at the Garden moment, and he deserved it because I truly do think he's among the best working actors right now. And I think his performance as Bob Dylan is outstanding. And I find myself really lost in his performance, or I did on my first watch. And on a second, sort of knowing how moved I'd be by his performance, I was sort of able to, I think, catch more around him. And I was really taking this time to echo some of Tucker's praise for the film. I was taken by how it looks. I think it's beautiful. I think it's beautifully lit. But moreover, I think it's beautifully edited and truly efficient in its screenplay. I think that the way we use editing and live performance to tell a lot of our story, to communicate a lot of our character relationships, how people are feeling about Bob at any particular moment, is just really, really effective filmmaking. And I echo Tucker's thoughts a lot too. I think it's a thematically very interesting film when we look at this moment of cultural upheaval and we look at this way that folk music and the dogmatic voices in folk and the experimental genre fusion that Dylan goes into on Highway 61 Revisited. I think those themes, this intergenerational clash, this culture clash, it's all presented, in my view, really effectively. It's never over-egged, I don't think. I think it knows just how much you need to deliver to the script, how much you can deliver at a glance, and how much can simply be conveyed by the music. The power of music, the power of songwriting is very key to our characters here, and I think that the film lets that be sort of principal language through through which the audience also receives information. So I think the movie is outstanding, and Timothée Chalamet continues to be my goat, and I think he will be one of the greatest of all time. So that's
There you have it. There you
sidebar.
have it.
Yeah.
Tanner, you're up next.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I don't find myself disagreeing in too grand a fashion with anything that's been said so far. It is obviously a technically proficient and astounding film in a lot of regards. The editing, the cinematography, the production design, all those things, of course. The cast, the ensemble that we're dealing with here is also very well balanced. We get a lot of talented performers, some newcomers coming in and really blowing people away, with like Monica Barbaro being a standout, of course, but also Elle Fanning coming in. Timothée Chalamet is such a talent, really surprises embodying Bob Dylan, who is, of course, perhaps the most inscrutable public, iconic figure of the American 20th century. And while I think he does a good job of embodying that role and is really kind of impeccable in these scenes, and especially in his performance moments, his musical performances specifically, I find Mangold's take on Dylan to be a little bit not necessarily confused or misguided, but like, Dylan is such a hard figure to make a movie about, and Mangold is certainly trying in a certain respect. He is trying to approach and encapsulate Bob Dylan while also not trying to do that, because it is sort of known that that is an impossible thing to do. So it ends up being...
You can't put Bobby in a box.
Exactly. The film tries to be at once incisive and also let Bob live as this sort of shell or ghost that is hard to pin down. I don't know if it ever fully hits its stride in trying to do both, since those are really kind of two very different ends. But it is nonetheless, of course, a very entertaining film with great performances. And so I enjoyed it, don't get me wrong. I just don't think that it's like the encapsulation, the like pin down, this is it, we've made the Bob Dylan movie.
I would say that I like this film quite a bit. I, at times, am a Bob Dylan lover, and at times I'm a Bob Dylan hater. I think that comes from my parents. My mom really hates Dylan, and my dad quite likes Dylan. And
Sure.
so, there's a
They're
lot
still
of...
together? How does that work?
I don't know. Maybe they have a healthy relationship. The presentation of this film, I think, is really quite excellent. The way that the like musical elements of this are so seamless. This is not a world where people break into song and dance, except that it is, because it's the real world in 1961 through 5. Like, right? We're in
Yeah.
Greenwich Village. We're in this milieu of music, and that provides a screenwriting tactic to just like allow the characters to be playing music and playing song. Then like, oh, we need them to play another song. It's like, okay, so then they can just be in a new club or in a recording studio or something. And so you have what feels like a very grounded and real film, despite it having all the trappings of a musical and using a lot of the same storytelling techniques. So I like that quite a bit. I really like it when the music and the like, not the narrative, because like you guys are saying, I think the narrative of the film is imbued through like the song choice of which like Dylan songs we hear at what point.
Yeah,
Of course, corresponding to his writing of them during this time period.
Mm-hmm.
But the like progression of hearing the music, seeing his life, hearing the music, I think is a very satisfying one, just because it's not frivolous. There's no extra trappings around the side of it that are there to kind of confuse us or make it not solely about Dylan and his coming up, and then his kind of disillusionment and transfer.
Sure.
And so I really like, I forget if it was Abram or Tanner who said that the kind of cultural shift of this moment. Like I think that the context of this film is super interesting, and I know so much more about the context than is presented in the film. So I'm like looking, when Pete Seeger says that they've got real blues artists to play at the Newport Folk Festival, all I want him to do is name the real blues artists. Just name drop them, because they name drop like one of these guys, and I totally dig the early style of music that I would say the first half of the film is going through. And so I think it's very interesting for the film to take that and push it away and to move past it and to be that voice of the younger generation and be that voice of newness in the 60s. Because this got me thinking, like, what is the root of American folk music? Knowing the folk revival of the 60s, but where was the first version? And I think the film gives us a good clue with Guthrie and this kind of like dusty dust bowl. It comes from the Great Depression, and yet the time period of America in the 30s and the 60s could not be more different. Those could not be more different places and cultures and societies. And so I think that like these two big clashes, both of how we should live as Americans and what music we want to listen to, are both put on display here. So you guys talked about the performances. I agree. I think Timmy really puts in an all-timer on this one. He totally is Dylan in my mind. The singing, the speaking, he's got this like sort of Minnesota accent, sort of not. You know, we learn he's from Hibbing, Minnesota. I've been to Hibbing. I've driven up and down Highway 61 on the side of Duluth, on the side of Lake Superior. And so I was glad to not use subtitles and just understand the words coming right out of his mouth.
You're able to
I'm
translate in real
acculturated.
time.
Yeah.
Sorry, I have to learn more about foreign language films as according to the comments.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
But I do actually want to start with something that you mentioned early on in your thoughts, Timo, which is this music milieu. You said use the word. I like that this movie exists in, that I think gives us a totally unique tone for a music biopic, because while this is the story of Bob Dylan's journey in his early career, I find that the moment to moment of this movie feels much more like an ensemble piece than most musicals end up being, because there are a lot of different artists who are involved in this film and play major roles.
Especially on a music biopic. Think about like Bohemian Rhapsody or Rocket Man. Yeah. These are all very singularly focused.
Absolutely. And Bob being in this movie's context, a character who is relatively self-contained and he has these connections, but they're kind of loose, and we'll certainly get into like all the dynamics. But I like that we surround Bob with a supporting cast of musically talented characters, all of whom bring some different musical texture and experience to the film. And what as I'm watching this movie, I'm really compelled by the way that seeing this ensemble cast of musical artists, they're able to each add different elements to the themes, different perspectives to the themes. And so where I see a lot of the themes blossoming is in that we can see how Joan reacts to things, see how Pete reacts to things, see how Johnny Cash reacts to things, Woody Guthrie. And it becomes this interesting web of inspirations and collaborations and duets. And each of these scenes like places the different artists together, and you sort of get this sense of how they learn from one another, how they push each other to do different things with their music, how that then influences the wider culture as we see time progress. And that is something that I really hadn't thought about too much before, especially not in the context of a music biopic film that is largely about usually one person. I love that we're able to bring in so many musical voices that each have their own different perspectives, and allows us to just get a massive tapestry of what music culture in this area in this time was like.
Yeah, and you very much have to filter this film, this story, through an ensemble cast of people and their relationships to Bob, because you can't have Bob be the singular focus, carrying this film on his shoulders, especially with how he is written in this film and how Chalamet performs him in this film.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He is, I don't want to keep using the word inscrutable, but it's the one that's coming to mind right now. But he is distant.
Let's go to the thesaurus for inscrutable.
Yeah, crack open a thesaurus for me, Daddy-O. But no, I mean, like, Chalamet's performance is distant, and he watches people a lot, and he's a bit of a mumblecore performer here in many respects. And so you simply must sort of surround him with people and have them bounce off of that exterior, and then he reacts to that. your perspective on Bob Dylan may vary, but he is a very reactive person who arguably was a sponge for a lot of different influences and political narratives of the time, really absorbed a bunch of different things and became what he wanted to become. I mean, there's a lot of discussion of that, of like your background, your influences. Does that influence who you are, or can you simply decide what you're going to become and then do it? I think those discussions of Bob Dylan's sort of personality and those insights into who he is are some of the most fascinating aspects, and get closest to Mangold making a sort of commentary on this figure.
Yeah, I think what I find quite interesting about this movie is that I feel like it's not that concerned with Dylan himself. I don't feel. I feel that that Dylan is here to move us through a cultural moment more so than we watch him experience that cultural moment. Or they're at least very closely intertwined. Like I think about when we have the missile crisis unfolding.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up.
Great scene. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
really.
it's to me it really illustrates how the film is operating, because we get one of the very moving, very iconic tracks from the Freewheelin' album there as he's performing it in the Gaslight bar. But we get it in tandem with this evacuation of New York, or sort of botched evacuation, as people are scrambling to catch a taxi or make a plan, or just simply running up the block, kind of unsure where they're going, but knowing, as we hear on the radio, as we hear on TV, that, well, perhaps there might not be any American families alive on the Eastern Seaboard in the morning.
Yeah.
Bob just sort of exists in that storm, and his relationship with Joan is moved forward because of it. And so I think we learn a lot about him politically. I think we learn a lot about the sort of just cultural context of New York in that time, of America in that time. It's not all about the song. In some ways, his performance of that is secondary to this larger moment. And so to me, I find that very novel, because I think it invites a thematic conversation larger than Bob. I almost don't even feel like a complete unknown is trying to draw any sort of specific conclusion or reading of Dylan. I think Dylan just exists in this context, and together we gain, I don't even know if it's a meaning, but sort of a series of discussion points about this American cultural inflection.
Yeah, I agree that it isn't really drawing conclusions about Dylan. I'm like just thinking about, so this is the first time I watched it, was earlier today, and the kind of, not necessarily like lack of themes, but my own disinterest in them. I am much more interested in our context, the history, and the musical context, and this kind of evolution that we see. And I think that evolution is both cultural and musical. And so it's kind of interesting. It's like, normally I really, and you guys know this quite well, I'm very interested in talking about themes and politics, and I'm still interested in the politics of this film, but like what's to be larger, what's to be gotten at on a larger scale at this film, I don't even know if I think that's important. I think that what's important is this like hard to pin down picture of Dylan and the rebelliousness of his character within the kind of drive for stardom. I think that like kind of once he gets a little bit of money, the costuming changes so drastically, and he starts wearing, I think, bona fide rock star outfits. And that is kind of the clue for me. That's more than him saying anything, really. Like when you start seeing him wearing these very slick suits and the sunglasses indoors, it's like he, in some ways, is propelled himself somewhat there, but he's clearly aiming for something very different than what Seeger is, than what Woody Guthrie is trying to do. And so these, I guess, the themes that I do kind of latch onto are the ones of like, what's the power of music? What kind of music is the kind that inspires change? Does it even matter that it's a kind of music? Is it just music
Mhm.
that inspires change? Like these are
Mm.
that kind of, I like this ending conflict that our third act is in a lot. Like the, will Dylan go electric? Is it folk music? Do we allow it
Yeah.
here? You know, I love getting to watch Alan Lomax get punched in the face. Like that guy deserved it for much more than just what happens in this movie. But the these are the kind of things that I think this film is speaking to me towards. And so I'm the sponge. I'm absorbing what you guys have to say about these other themes. But
Yeah.
like you say, the historical context is super interesting. We get throwaway lines to, you know, JFK is assassinated in this film, and Malcolm X, I think, is. Do they reference that?
They just shot Malcolm X
Yeah.
as the line. Yeah.
Mhm. And so makes me think like, oh, these are huge American cultural events that are well known in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And this film doesn't have a huge time scale. It's not 2 decades. It's a couple years.
Yeah.
All of that happens within the time span of this film, and that just really cements this like why this film is prescient today. Immense amount of change, and the change is unfolding, and the characters are in the center of it, reacting to it and causing it, and makes me think about us. Are we in a moment
Sure,
similar to
absolutely.
that? You know,
I
Am
found
I
myself
Bob
thinking, whoa.
Am I
who's
the
a
Bob
real
Dylan
Bob
of
Dylan?
podcasting?
I found myself thinking,
certainly in the way you
as-
sound, Tanner.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I tried to do my best around
Can I
here.
review a movie here? I found myself thinking as I was watching this movie about the idea of a story like this being told in 50 years. That is about the moment of change that we're going through now, and how there may be parallels to that. But in the moment, it's very hard for me to think about what right now counts as the counterculture. What artists are writing these songs that are inspirational to the people? Like, how would you tell a story 50 years from now that mirrors Bob Dylan's journey? I think it's really compelling to think about, and the idea of counterculture in this movie I think is really fascinating in the way that the folk singers and the way they want to use the way that Pete and Woody and Bob all want to use their songs to inspire the people and write their lyrics about things that are relevant to what's going on. We get some intercutting between like lyrics that are sort of referencing things that are happening culturally at the time, and then we get to like see some news footage of it and things like that. And yet, even though they are the people that are like, about like freedom of expression and trying to inspire people with music, because what is it? A good song leads to good, or something like Pete says.
A
Something
good
like that.
song can only do good, and I do very well believe that.
I stand by that. But then the conflict at the end is that the counterculture people are restricting what an artist can do to express themselves, and I find this like texture really, really interesting, where it's like layered on like in groups and conflict and change, and even the counterculture resisting change. Like that's kind of where the conflict of the movie comes from, and I find that really, really compelling.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, and this stuff is, you know, right there on the surface of the movie. I mean, they give it to you in the first 10 minutes of this movie with the scene of Pete and Bob driving in the car going to stay at Pete's home for the first time.
Listening to the radio.
Exactly, and this discussion of, you know, folk versus rock and roll, and electric and everything like that is right there from the very start. And yeah, I mean, I think that what a good bit of character interplay that maybe does not translate to a strong thematic through line throughout the entire film, where it bubbles to the surface at the beginning, and then, you know, obviously boils over at the very end, as you guys were sort of mentioning, is that digression, is that discussion, those two sort of dueling minds, because the folk scene, this is getting into sort of Timo's discussion, or Timo's sort of interest in the music history aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like this counterculture thing was still at its very inception. Like the folk music guys were you know, all at once very traditional. They were very, you know, they were born out of the Dust Bowl in a lot of ways. They were not like the hippie, you know,
like hippie free love comes like 2 or 3 years
Exactly.
later. It comes
This
in
is
the
the
late
seed
60s.
of that. Yeah.
It's
But-
even
but
I don't even it's so hard to tell what's countercultural. I think at least in the depiction that this film makes, because we're so in it, we're so like absorbed and surrounded by this like
Mhm.
counterculture. We're not really shown what the normal culture is.
Mm-hmm.
We know though from our normal history that it is kind of like what is it? Not James Brown, the other guy. The whatever. There's
sorry, I'm trying to. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to help you out there, but
big monolithic like rock music. And the end of like the pre-rock kind of doo-wop era
Yeah.
is what's real. Still the like main record label.
well, because they're not even really concerned with like the doo-wop, the pop music, the radio hits of the moment. What they're discussing is like American traditionals. Is exactly this phrase that comes up quite a bit, which is accepted at the time. It's not necessarily a countercultural thing, but the figures within it who are progressive politically are the issue there. I mean, we see the opening courtroom scene with Pete Seeger is exactly what he's talking about. Like, he is an American traditionalist. He sings the classics. He sings these classic American songs that harken to Americana. But he is then like, and also like workers' rights and racial equality. Like, these are in line with American values that are in these songs. And then, the powers that be, they don't necessarily agree with that. They take him to court for contempt of Congress, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm.
There is this editing move that I really love. I believe it's right after Bob is experimenting with playing electric for the first time. He's starting to work on the Highway 61 material.
Mm-hmm.
And we cut from that to this very small, archaic TV screen.
Great editing moment of juxtaposition there.
Yeah, where Pete Seeger is playing his banjo for this sort of educational live TV.
He's on like
local TV
public
program.
access educational TV.
Mhm.
And then
And-
there's the funny moments of the guy that he's with, yeah.
100%, and it's a great scene. But I sort of, in that transition, I think we reveal a really key dimension of what this film is interested in, which is this generational difference and this inability for Seeger's generation to understand what's happening.
Yeah.
And we return to this. One of Bob's key big Newport numbers, he's singing about how parents
Yeah.
can't understand and try to control their children, this new generation who is moving beyond them. And I think that the film is interesting because it sort of traps us, but in the space between. It traps us sympathetic to Pete,
Mm-hmm.
especially Pete, against the more dogmatic folk voices, the ones less willing to try and
Lomax.
Friend of the show, by the way. Norbert Leo Butts, the guy who plays
Alan Lomax.
Lomax. He's my dad's good friend. I've made some art for him.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh.
That's right on.
I was like, Norbert.
He's you send him art compliments. He's very hateable in this movie.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is, I think, a really exciting dimension of the film. This way that we're looking at generational difference through music. And if we extrapolate this out more broadly, the way that we look at this moment, moment of political social upheaval through art. I think that that's the point of view. I don't even look at culture, counterculture. I look at how does an artistic community respond to this changing world, and what happens when that community is fractured by a fundamental listening difference. And that's something that's 100% true nowadays. I mean, it's sort of a recurrent joke between me and a lot of my older friends and colleagues at work that I'll be like, that a lot of the artists I listen to, a Playboy Cardi or a Future or a lot of these really, well, Future is like 41, so he's not even a great example here.
Yeah.
But a lot of your, like, Ken Carson, it doesn't matter. These younger, hot, like, artists leaning into Satanism and leaning into this iconography that a lot of people don't understand and a sound that to a lot of people is just noise. But there's something in there that my ear hears that it feels like on an almost unilateral level, people 10, 12 years older than me can't hear. And I
Mhm.
think that the film is interested in that. And I think that it is a sort of universally true fundamental element of music
I
and
think
musical progression.
I'm going to complicate what you say because I think that public access TV scene has a lot more to say about the past than about this new future because Seeger is hanging out with what was the name of the blues player in that scene?
His name is, I just looked this up because I wanted to get a fun fact. He is portrayed by Big Bill Morganfield, as he's credited in the movie, which is awesome. But the
Yeah.
character that he's playing is Jesse Moffett.
So now I don't remember if Jesse Moffett is a real blues man or not, or somebody that they wrote for this movie. But
There's a
regard-
couple, like, name switches things going on in this movie, yeah.
the drinking being clues us right into who this character is going way back. This guy is an old blues player, has clearly been drinking heavily his whole life, drinks to play, probably isn't actually very good when he's not a little sauced up. And the fact that when Dylan arrives at the studio, so he plays and he's playing very different music than, and we just think about like how it sounds. The banjo song that Seeger plays and then the slide guitar song that Moffat plays right after are very different. And yet, if to our ears, we are going to pick that blues song as the much more modern sounding one, because of the slide, because of the chords, the progression, and all that. The fact that Dylan comes in, sits down, listens, figures out how to play it. He's that sponge. He absorbs
Mhm.
this older, traditional still, but and he's even Seeger even says he's from the Delta, which just makes me love it. I was like, I love it. He's from the Delta. Okay, I've been to his grave.
Traditional, but not in the way that we were just talking about, where he's the embraced American traditions that might be played on the
traditional.
radio.
It's
Yeah.
black traditional. It's black music, and so Dylan then. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's a sponge. He's inspired by it. He has reverence for it. And plays that music and plays along, and they all kind of jam in that moment. And then Dylan goes on to incorporate a lot of these bluesier elements into his more rock and roll
Mhm.
style. And for me, that is like an explanation of the synthesis of your past and your present into the future. The using of blues music from deep in the past and knowing that blues music at this time was becoming more popular in this circle that we're in. It was not popular outside of the circle. It had been forgotten from the 30s through the 50s. It was very popular in the 20s, but had been forgotten during the Depression. And then it comes back around, and there's a big revival for it. Newport Folk Festival brings out all the old guys. Lomax himself travels the country the years prior to the festival, harassing, not some people he's harassing, some he's asking nicely to get these old players back into the limelight. And that tradition, that old style, I see it, I hear it in Dylan's music, just, listening outside of the film. But then I think the film does a very special point to make it clear in this scene that, like, this is a big inspiration for all of these artists. And it goes in line with Seeger's like civil rights work that he's elevating this important cultural artifacts of group of Americans who were not given their just earnings from
Mhm.
these incredible pieces of art that had been forgotten or forced out of the culture for so long. And in some way, Dylan is pulling that in and bringing that into the culture with his music, and it isn't universally liked in the ending scene.
Well, yeah, that's sort of the key thing, is that I do like that they play this what would in any other musical biopic, and I do want to give this film props on the whole for separating itself away from like even Mangold's film from like 20 years ago, Walk the Line, which I'm not a fan of, because I think it set the tone. Mangold, we can sort of take shots at him being nominated for Best Director, but he is influential in the fact that he sort of set the rhythm and tone for the modern music biopic in Walk the Line. And now in A Complete Unknown, sort of changes that up. The final concert is not a triumphant moment necessarily. It is a triumphant moment for him establishing his own sound, for coming into his own, for successfully making a jump in spite of a lot of people, which is in itself a little bit more which in itself is a way to sort of bend to the conventions of the music biopic. But it's also not like, and he won over the entire crowd and they're all super big fans of him. No, like even before he comes out for his encore, he's still getting like trash thrown at him, etc. Timo, just before it comes up, I'll throw out my fun fact, just because I don't think it'll come up again. Big Bill Morganfield is, of course, the son of Muddy Waters. So, yes,
we love Muddy Waters on this show.
Muffet is the son of Muddy Waters.
Well, no wonder he can play. I will note all the playing in this movie looks really good. It looks like Timmy is actually playing the guitar. I mean, his fingers are moving perfectly in time. He's moving around. I don't know if he's playing the right notes. Harmonica, probably dubbed, but looks like he's playing it too. Good job on that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, Tanner, you brought up the film subverting the musical biopic convention by having that final scene be filled with a little bit more tension and uncomfortability than you would usually expect from the big triumphant moment of the climax of the film. And I think another way that this film really does subvert your traditional protagonist from a music biopic is that we've used the word inscrutable to describe Mr. Bob Dylan, but the fact that he is a mysterious, enigmatic, very closed-off person makes him not particularly likable, especially not once you learn to empathize with the people that he's impacting around him.
His actions also don't help.
No, well, of course. I mean, he's the one that eggs on all of the annoyances, frustrations, lost relationships that we end up seeing across the course of the film. I'd like to sort of focus on the supporting cast and relationships and dynamics a bit, because I do think that that's where I get most of my intrigue and thematic value out of this film, because you guys have been talking a lot about the music history and the political history and all of these themes that are certainly present. I'm at face value aware of them, did not think of them once while I was watching this movie for my second time. And that's because I watch this movie more from a humanistic angle. And it's more for me about the thought process of an artist and the ways that fame impacts someone and the way that they approach creating art. And I want to delve into each of these, but it all comes back to Bob Dylan and Timothee Chalamet's performance as Bob Dylan being really, really unusual. And he is very, frankly, stone-faced. He doesn't show a lot of emotion. He doesn't really say a lot of things. He's kind of just sitting there not reacting to most things. And it makes him like a wall that you're like, I don't really know what this guy's deal is. Like, I don't really know how he feels in a lot of situations. And it sets you as a viewer, I think, in a very different tone that allows you to empathize with the supporting cast a lot more than it does with the protagonist of the film. And I really like that, again, because I do think this movie works best when it is about that ensemble. And so Timothee Chalamet, like, being very, very closed off and like straight face, and like his eyes are kind of like almost glazed over in a lot of these scenes. I really like the totally unique tone that gives it for a music biopic, because if you keep feeling like you're like trying to learn about this guy and he just doesn't let you.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally what Mangold is going for here in his interpretation of Dylan, which is, again, something I brought up in my opening thoughts, is that that is the way that at least other filmmakers that I'm familiar with, most notably I'm Not There by Todd Haynes, also try to do it. Todd Haynes, of course, in that film does it in a much more roundabout, less narratively traditional way that I like to discuss. Are you guys familiar with I'm Not There, Todd Haynes' film?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Only in the concept of multiple actors playing him.
Yes. Yeah. So the concept of I'm Not There, I'll summarize very briefly, is Todd Haynes casts like 5 or 6 different actors to portray Bob Dylan in various different settings, parts of his life, or just like interpretations that are like metaphorical for parts of his life. Like Richard Gere plays a Bob Dylan type character, except it's set in the Old West. and this kind of thing. So it's a way to fracture Bob Dylan and look at him through many different lenses that is very, very fascinating and very, very interesting. All that being said, yeah, it is the way that Mangold tries to do that here, tries to examine that fracturing and what he means and the various different sides of Dylan and what he can mean to different people is a more literal, like, well, let's make it an ensemble film. Let's get Pete Seeger, let's see him multiple times. Let's get, let's even get Bob Dylan, or not Bob Dylan, Johnny Cash, rather.
Yeah.
Let's get Joan Baez. Let's get a Sylvie Russo, who is, again, like a name-shifted character from Susie something. I forget the actual woman's name. But, like, let's get these people and have them come back and flow in and out of Bob's life. But there's always someone there with him.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I find especially the romantic angle of this film and the two relationships that we watch him create and then ultimately kind of dismantle by the end of the film, that is where I get a lot of my intrigue in this movie. Not only because I think both Monica Barbaro and Elle Fanning are really, really fantastic in this movie, and they both portray very different kinds of women that Bob has sort of has dynamics with across the course of the film, and their more emotional reactions to the things that Bob Dylan does gives me a very empathetic, emotional into what it would be like to be with someone who is very inscrutable and you want to know more about them, but they're not letting you into their life. And it like just makes me think about the ways that we as people develop our dynamics and share things about ourselves and hide things about ourselves. And the thematic idea that I think this movie kind of starts with, and where Bob Dylan starts his journey even before he's performed in front of a crowd, as far as we know, is that when you are famous, or I guess just in general, I think I wrote down a line here, that people make up their past. He's talking to Sylvie. He says they remember what they want and they make up the rest. And so as you become more famous, as your story begins to be told, you become an icon rather than a person. And so this movie is, I think, very fascinated with Bob Dylan's conflicted obsession with being famous and being an icon or being a person. And like, how does he feel about the way that other people think about him? I also wrote down another line that he said early before that about being a compelling presence on stage. And he says, it made me think about people on stage. Anyone who's going to hold your attention on stage, you have to be kind of a freak. You can be beautiful, you can be ugly, but you can't be plain. You got to be something that people can't stop looking at. And he says like a crane crash or a car crash.
Car crash.
A car crash.
Yeah.
But I find that really interesting because it puts you, that I think is really the strongest element of like that puts you in his mindset of like, how does he feel about portraying himself? He comes up with this story about him being raised by cowboys at the circus that it simply cannot be true. But it makes you think about why he's hiding these things, how he wants to portray himself. And of course, all of this comes back at the end when he's trying to unleash more of his personal creative identity, but the structure that he's been set up in is pushing him back down. And so there's this really fascinating ebb and flow of his connection to fame and where he wants to be the icon or not be the icon.
I think thinking about fame, we have this ensemble cast, so let's compare the fame of our two leads here. Let's compare Pete Seeger and Bob Dylan in the way that they interpret fame and the way that they seek it or don't, and the way that they react to it. The Pete Seeger, we're never really shown the effects of his fame on his life. Whereas after Dylan has a couple albums out, we see that finally one of them starts selling and he's unable to go very many places and he's noticed and he can't watch a band without somebody noticing him and then the whole thing gets shut down and then the people want him to play as opposed to the people that he was there to watch.
Yeah.
Seeger, on the other hand, is less surrounded by fame. I think he's not equally famous, but he's comparably famous in this time.
Well, the star is fading, and he's not famous amongst the young people.
Amongst maybe tastemakers, we should say. And so, well, I'm not exactly sure where the conclusion is to be drawn here, but they have very different dealings with fame.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
seems that Dylan's is much more tumultuous and complicated
Totally.
than Seeger's. And Seeger's
Yeah.
has a wife and kids and is like, that's good enough for him, it seems.
Mhm.
The deal with Seeger is that he's not like a vampiric sort of like old man trying to glom on to Bob Dylan's star power and like become famous off the back of that. He has a more soft-hearted goal in mind, and he very clearly lays that out in the Brigade of Teaspoons monologue at the very end of the film. So that is Timothy.
You see that there's sand in the bucket, and
Well, we
people bring
take
their
we-
spoons.
Well, what we do is everyone takes their little teaspoon out, and we just really try to just
Why
scoop
does
some
he
sand
have,
into that basket.
he had whenever I'm dungeon mastering in Dungeons and Dragons and I need to have like the innocent old man characters, exactly what Edward Norton is doing
Timo,
with
it's
his
almost
voice.
like that's what he's trying to do with his performance, isn't it? Also, a very interesting performance for Norton. Many people have noted this, that he's seemingly taking some lessons out of his work with Wes Anderson and taking it into this character. Very
Sure.
different type of character than Edward Norton would have played even like 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. No yelling on
I
that
think,
role.
well,
Last time we saw him on Quest, he was in Birdman.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
I mean, Bob Dylan's an interesting person because I think that there are not many in his echelon of influence and stardom who are less interested in their fame.
Mhm.
hmm
I mean, the performance that he gives on stage with Joan Baez is very much illustrative of how he moved through his life. He didn't want to play Blowing in the Wind because he didn't want to play Blowing in the Wind.
Yeah.
And the we even get it in the text cards as the film is closing, or before we hit the credits, the fact that he is the only Nobel songwriter Nobel laureate, and he didn't even attend the ceremony.
hmm
Mhm.
He is not interested in the archetypal life of fame or the
Yeah.
archetypal life of a performer. I mean, you go see any icon of any generation, current or past, in concert, and they will play you their hits.
hmm
They will do that. They will save them, and that will be the end of the show. That's not
yes, continue, sorry.
Yeah, but that's not Bob's show, and that's not Bob's deal. And I think that the latter half of the film has a pretty, in my view, clear and decisive opinion, or a decisive interpretation of Bob's feeling on fame.
hmm
I don't actually view it as conflicted at all. I think about when he has to arrive at the party, and he sort of a performance is thrust upon him, and he gets hit later that night. He's at a club where we're listening to Bobby Newark play, and he ends up
Mhm.
back at Sylvia's apartment, and he says, when people ask me where do my songs come from, what they're
Yeah,
really
I like this line a
asking
lot.
Yeah.
is why didn't the songs come to them instead?
Mhm.
Yeah.
I don't think that this version of Bob is anything other than antagonistic towards the fame and status he's accrued,
Yeah,
and sort of struggling to deal with that.
but he does
Uh,
want to be famous. I don't think, unless
Yeah.
that's
I
a
think
disagreeable
he does
statement.
too.
I think he just realizes that he doesn't really like it, and that the kind of fame, the things that he has to do to keep that fame, are what he doesn't want. He wants to be famous. He wants people to hear his music, but he doesn't want to conform to the box of this is what you do when you are famous. But he does, I think, give in quite a few times, especially in the first half of the movie, to things that he doesn't exactly want to do, doing covers for people, giving Joan access to one of his songs beforehand, because the producers and his publishers and stuff say, like, this is what you do, like, you have to do these things. And of course, he then ends up playing a couple songs on tour with Joan and things, but he's like, I don't exactly want to do this, but you have to give it in certain ways. And it's the reason why I say it's conflicting is because I think the movie kind of sine wave up and downs his feelings on if he's going to do this or not, like, or how far he's going to capitulate and go against like his artistic intentions in order to please the audience. And so what I think is another really fascinating core theme of this movie is, for an artist, should they be performing and creating for themselves or for the audience, for what the people want? And that's what I think that he has a real conflict of, is he does want to touch people. He wants, well, God, that came out a little wrong.
Wink, wink,
He wants
nudge, nudge. Phrasing.
He wants to touch their lives. He wants to impact the world, and he wants his ideas to be spread across the world. But he also doesn't want to do it in the exact way other people want him to. He is a very spiteful person at the end of the day. He's doing things to kind of egg people on, to like kind of be gritty and annoying. And that's where I think the conflict comes from, is him like pushing back or giving in on different occasions to the whims of other people.
My question though is there maybe this is just escaping me, but is there any time where Bob has to capitulate? Is there any time where he loses that battle on an artistic front?
Yeah, I mean, when he wants to play his own songs, but they have to do covers, and he's talking to Sylvie when they're in the bar,
yeah.
and he's
I guess so.
He's like, that's what you do. I think
that's different though, and I guess I'm maybe not making my point super clearly, because there's the film is operating in a pre-fame and post-fame.
Oh, sure,
Dylan.
Yeah, definitely,
and they are different.
I mean, they even mentioned the Beatles in this thing. Like, yeah,
100%.
Free glasses
British
and post
Invasion
glasses.
Pop Festival.
Max.
In terms of costuming, we see different Bobs, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And after we see this
Not hands, eat your heart out.
this post freewheeling Bob, he is. I agree with you guys 100%. He wants to be famous, but there is a way that you act in fame. There's a way that you are expected to carry yourself.
He does not want to be a celebrity.
Sure, that's a much better way of putting it.
He wants to be a famous artist.
Yeah, and to that end, I think he is uncompromising, Tanner. I mean, we have.
I think he's completely. Think about the scene where he's trying to get the players he wants for his sessions, and he will not. He will not. He's like, get it done, boom, and he hangs up. It's like, that's about as uncompromising as you can get.
Yeah. Again, another classic thing of while on the surface it feels like this film isn't necessarily playing to the music biopic conventions. Like, that could be out of Bohemian Rhapsody or Walk the Line or whatever.
His relationship with Johnny Cash is, I think, where you could most closely see there's really two examples. There's two moments in which, on a sort of interpersonal level, he acquiesces, I suppose. Mm-hmm. When I think it's the last Newport Festival before the climactic one, he arrives late. He's supposed to be playing with Joan, and then Joan, away from the microphone, is like, you just play something nice. You play something sensible.
Yeah.
And he does. He's affable in that moment. Or after he's played like a Rolling Stone and Newport is in tatters, when Cash holds out his guitar and he returns to stage, he did that for Johnny Cash, or at least because of him. And I think that those are really the only moments where you see this agreeability or compromise. You don't see it elsewhere.
Yeah. And a little bit of Mangold bias coming through, I think, in this display of the character being like, oh, who's the one guy that Bob Dylan always looks up to and never disagrees with? Oh, the other guy I made a movie about, Johnny Cash. These are the two most important musical figures who are sort of in this whirlwind dance of, yeah.
Well, he has that refrain Johnny Cash does that I love, of go track mud on somebody's carpet.
Yeah. I love that he says it twice. I actually like that we get to hear it again right at the end of the movie.
So nice. Had to write it twice.
Yeah.
But Abra, I think you make a great point. I think maybe we can meet in the middle ground and say he becomes more uncompromising as the movie goes on. And so that is where the movie climaxes, and he, in front of a crowd of thousands of people, is like, no, I'm not doing what you want. But I also like the fact that with his very abrasive attitude and uncompromising nature, that is also where all of the conflict of the movie comes from. Is from our protagonist not capitulating, not being understanding, not being very empathetic on many occasions. And again, I mentioned earlier that I think most of Chalamet's performance is very stone-faced, and I mean that as a compliment. But the only moment I really got like a lot of emotion out of him is the moment when Sylvie has left the festival and is going to go on the boat, and they're on the other side of a chain link fence, and you do get that, I think, one of very few fleeting moments of empathy from Bob Dylan when Sylvie is very clearly hurt and their goals are misaligned for what their weird, 5 years later, not really relationship is going to be. And he realizes that his uncompromising nature, his abrasive attitude, causes the people that he at some point was closest to be pushed away from him. And at the end of the movie, he just rides off into the sunset on his bike, and like he doesn't even really talk to many people like in the last few 5-10 minutes of the movie, because everyone at that point is kind of done with his shit. And again, returning to the supporting performances, the emotion of those scenes comes from primarily Pete, Joan, and Sylvie, and the ways in which they react to things. And I love watching all three of their faces when they're in a room with Bob Dylan and he's not doing much of anything. He's not really listening. He's not paying attention. He refuses to agree in so many situations. And you see these glances of from Pete, Joan, and Sylvie of, I care about this guy. I know that he's not trying to hurt me, but god damn, this is frustrating. Well, and I love those little reactions.
So yeah, I think we talked about Bob's relationships or his connections to Pete and Johnny Cash for about the amount of time that sort of reflects how big their impact is in the movie, respectively.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about Bob's relationship with the women in his life, notably Joan and Sylvie here. So yes, I think that Monica Barbaro and Elle Fanning are fantastic in this movie. Very great performances that are maybe this is controversial to say, but perhaps underwritten. The roles for them, because if I am perhaps being too simplified in my view of these characters, it is a lot of Bob, you're an asshole. I can't believe what an asshole you are, but you are a genius at the end of the day. So I guess I will continue to put up with your shit.
Yeah. It's like, are they independent? I think that they get to do they are active characters off screen. Like we hear about them making choices and doing stuff and breaking up with Bob, but I don't think, since we don't see that, does that make us feel that they are?
Oh, we do. I mean,
characters?
Both of the we see Joan tell Bob to get out of the room in the hotel room, and we see Sylvie tell him this is enough when she leaves.
Yeah. And then later on when he shows up after being punched and she's like, "What are you doing? We broke up a long time ago." Yeah.
I think the reason they might feel underwritten is that this movie is very jumpy aroundy, and it's also not particularly concerned with showing us the quote unquote relationship highlights from any of the things. We mostly get this sort of in between moments, and except for, of course, we get the beginnings of both of their his involvement with them. And what I like about them, and why I think I don't particularly agree that they're underwritten, is I think that their dynamics with Bob feel very, very real to me, in the way of, I really love the initial dynamic between Bob and Sylvie, in which Bob is very quiet and he's just asking a couple questions, short answers, not really fully expressing himself. But Sylvie is all right, this is my schedule, this is what's going on, this is how things are. And you can see the sort of opposites attract kind of thing going on there, where Bob actually kind of likes that there's someone who's willing to structure things a little bit. Then, of course, as their relationship evolves, he starts sort of reject that and push her away. And that really feels like a very believable couple dynamic to me, of here's the person that's all right, take out the trash at this time, make sure you clean up. And is okay, whatever. And then with Joan, I think Bob and Joan are a lot more similar in their sort of lackadaisicalness, and they sort of see each other on an artistic level, and they can kind of understand the inspirations. But Joan deals with the fame a little bit better, is more understanding to, like, you have to capitulate sometimes, you have to be more empathetic. And so I really think that the texture with the dynamics between all three of those characters, but the love triangle, really comes from the ways that they ultimately do impact each other. Is Bob is taught by Sylvie that it is important to be a little bit more structured, and he is taught by Joan that it's important to capitulate on occasion. And so I just found those to be really, really believable, and great chemistry between all of them. So I just don't agree that they feel underwritten to me.
I mean, I think we already hit the thing of like, yeah, how many times does Bob actually capitulate, especially after he meets Joan? But like, no, I understand. I'm not being like, oh, these characters are so flat, they're so boring, whatever. But I am just like, it feels like a lot of their scenes recur. It is, especially for Sylvie, it's a lot of like, hey, Sylvie, I want you to come to the show and watch me play a little bit. And she's like, okay, Bob, I guess I will come along and watch you play. And then she stands on the side of the stage and cries and runs away. That happens 3 times in this movie. And I understand the function of it is that it works very well the first time. Don't get me wrong. I mean, when Elle Fanning is sort of like holding back the tears in her eyes as she realizes you feel the character feeling like, Bob has gotten too big for me. He is now like a world famous music star, and who am I? And she runs away. Like, that's an effective character moment. And then it happens again, and then a time again at the 1965 version of the festival. So yeah, maybe that's just what I'm feeling. And then Joan is a little bit more like, they're together. I like their scene in the hotel room where she's like, why did you come here just to make me watch you write? And then she's just, fuck you, I don't like you, for the rest of the movie.
Yeah. And then
I don't know.
Go ahead, Abram.
I guess I just sort of I think that the relationship that Joan and Bob have is more complicated than that.
Mm-hmm.
Because they meet each other in different conditions than most of their professional relationship unfolds within. Him as this ostensible nobody when she is the Time cover artist.
Mm-hmm.
The disparity there, his quickly rising star, her interest in, maybe more than any other character in the narrative, attaching herself to that. The taking, blowing in the wind. I think that there is a more complex dimension there that carries on through the end of the film, wherein there's a constant battle between them. Maybe you can view the relationship with Sylvie as being too recursive, but even then, I think that her remark through the fence about her being the plate that he spins in his act, to be an acknowledgement of what you're saying, this final desire to no longer spin at his command. To me, that's satisfying, but I think also satisfying is just this conflict that Joan and Timothy are in, or Joan and Bob are in, because they are personally and professionally intertwined.
Yeah.
She's a rival to him. She's a rival to Sylvie sexually and a rival to him professionally. And I think that complicates the relationship more. And I think about the moment when Sylvie is watching from the sidelines one of the later Newport shows, and they're singing duet, and
it's a beautiful duet. It's a very moving
as
song.
All the musical sequences in this film are.
And as she runs in the sort of in these more climactic moments, she's running, hearing Bob's song, and identifying that the song is about how she feels about him. And it's also coming from Joan. I just think that there's more going on there.
Let me be clear here. So yeah, I mean that It Ain't Me section, that final duet is a good moment to display like both of our female characters sort of refuting Bob's using of them, because I think that is pretty inarguably what Bob does to the female characters in this film. He uses them and takes from them the things that he wants, whether that be the more racially progressive stuff that he integrates into his music from Sylvie and her involvement in core, et cetera, et cetera. And Joan, like, while it's maybe can be read as like a music producer lie, like the fact that she is like covering his songs and like propping up his star power a little bit with the duets and the going on tour between the both of them thing, like he is also taking that from her as well, and also putting her down at a great number of times with like insulting her music and insulting how she has sold out to elevate his own feelings of like rock and roll hillbilly maverick sort of thing. This is also a circumspect way of me saying that like the final moment, that it ain't me section, is a good moment to cap off his relationships with both of those female characters, because they aren't necessarily important in what's little left of the movie after that.
Well, it's a climax moment for this narrative arc of the way that these three characters see each other and relate to each other. And it is interesting that the "it ain't me" lines are in some ways referring to both of them. That both of the women,
Yeah, definitely.
they can't be with him because, yeah, he's not a good partner in this film.
It is a little bit, yeah. It is a meta acknowledgement, I feel, from Mangold. Even something that he does in Walk the Line with Reese Witherspoon's character in that film, and in a great many biopics that we've talked about, and many others that we've seen, of like the great man and the woman in his life, and like how deep or complex is the character of the woman in his life.
The great man and the woman behind him.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I like that final moment is especially from Joan's sort of rejection of that idea. It's her, like, through the lyrics of the song and the way that they're like looking at each other, and of course she like flips him off like like while she's like angled away. There's this moment where she's like, because she's the one who's able to capitulate professionally through the performance, tell him that this is not something that she can deal with anymore. And I think that is a really fascinating performance moment from especially Monica Barbaro and Elle Fanning, because we mentioned like Elle holding back tears and like running away and all of that stuff. And like I think that realization that that they have this, that the two of them had this relationship, that the song is about her, all that I think is really interesting. But from Joan, I think it's especially fascinating because the way that they're so close together as they're singing that song, I think is actually the most intimate scene in the whole movie.
Sure,
the way that their heads are so close together and they're looking at each other as they're singing this. But I think from Monica Barbaro's performance, you get this, like, this is my last moment with someone that I've had a connection with. And like, we're sharing this final moment. It is intimate. It does feel very personal, even though there are, thousands of people watching, but it also, knowing the energy that she's bringing into it of being frustrated from that hotel scene and flipping him off right before that, she's like, I can't be with you anymore. I can't deal with this anymore. And then we only see her like, I think maybe twice after that point. But I think that's another one of the best scenes in the movie, because it feels so personal in front of a stage of thousands. It's a really fascinating character dynamic that I think is explored there.
Maybe it probably is just like a difference of how the characters are utilized, and recognizing the gendered aspect of it. But I just look at it and I compare, like, let's say look at like the relationship between Bob, Joan, and or Sylvie, and like compare it to the depth of things that we talked about for even like Bob and Pete. Like Pete has a lot grander sort of expanse of things that relationship stands for than I think Bob has with Joan or Bob has with Sylvie. Like you can spin the thing out with Pete into this whole difference in culture and music advancement and in cultural advancement and everything. I think the film is obviously very interested in that relationship and what that amplifies, and I think it is just a different interpretation, a different use of what Mangold and the other writer, Jay Cox, I believe, are trying to do with the female characters.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Timo?
Well, y'all said it about these three characters. I pretty much agree. I think that there is a difference between the male and the female characters and the relationships that they have, and whether that's a detriment on the film's part or not, I don't know. I don't feel super strongly one way or another. I think that it's important. I think it's extremely important that we see how Dylan relates to women, and we
Mhm.
see how not necessarily, yeah, he unfaithful. How he's
Well,
sort
yeah,
of
yeah.
he's
That part's pretty
pretty
obvious.
obvious, and
Oh.
that a couple of other women that we haven't talked about pop up in the film.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, so it's like he's trying. There's the funny gag though at the end in which, okay, so they're in the hotel room and Dylan, they're like, it's the morning after, I guess, what's her name? Joan Baez has pretty much left the picture, and
Mhm.
Sylvie has left the picture, but there's like another body in the bed next to Dylan.
Oh, who is that?
and
It's Albert.
and then it's Albert. It's get a little bit of visual.
What the same hell's It's 7. It's a crack of dawn.
Before the
What the
rooster
hell, Pete?
before the rooster crows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I didn't know, Timo, if you wanted to discuss at all the sound mixing and editing of this film, because it is quite exquisite in my amateur opinion, I guess. I mean,
I would agree.
All the music is just right
The
up
music-
front, in your ears, in your face the whole time.
There's a lot of playing with perspective here because we have so many moments that are like at a concert. And so at a concert, you could choose to be like, do we hear it like right out of the speakers? Do we hear it in the middle of the room? Do we hear it from the back of the audience? The camera is like on the stage. So do we hear it what the performers are hearing? But like, if you actually know how concerts are put on, what performers are hearing is utterly and completely different from what the fans
Well,
hear.
yeah.
It's like stuff to help them play. So the choices that they make, I think, are really well picked and well implemented. There was so I picked out some ADR in this one. I haven't noticed
yeah.
ADR
Yeah, me
in
too.
any of the other Best Picture winners, but this one had a couple. Timmy's got this moment where he's got his hand right here, and he's like kind of chewing on his nails, kind of like just kind of
Mhm.
pondering, and it's like they changed the line underneath that, didn't they?
He's got some long nails in this one, too. I wonder if those were prosthetics or Timmy really grew those out.
Prosthetic nails.
Well, you know.
Lots of people
You know
wear
what I mean.
prosthetic nails.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I just haven't heard that term before.
Fake nails, I think, is a more common term. It is a thing that normal people wear as well, not just actors in movies.
Chalamet's singing, very, very good in this.
Yeah.
I think he really, I think it's important that we hear that we're not just listening to tracks off of albums. It's important that we actually believe simultaneously that it is the actor doing the singing, and yet the actor is not an actor, it is the real person. Because I think like the construction of the film falls apart if we don't have these two contradictory ideas in our head at the same time. And Timothy knocks it out of the park with it. He sounds like Dylan, but he sounds like Chalamet. And so that's testament to the mix. It's a testament to his performance. And it all goes to just really make us believe. I want to believe that this is real. It's not, but the film does a lot of lifting to make fiction. But so yeah, I think there's a good amount of praise to be heaped on this. The Cinema Audio Society did give this film its top awards two weekends ago. So think about that. I don't know what they're gonna. I think in the running of best sound, it's this or Wicked. Despite there being a lot of really other good sound in other movies, they will probably go between those two. Just because
you're tossing out Dune as an option.
I just think the
Sam's
sound
updating his thing as we.
I just think the sound people are not gonna respond more to these musicals than to Dune.
That.
And didn't they give Dune best sound? Dune 1 best sound?
They did.
Yeah, they might pick something else.
Also, apparently nobody's watching Dune Part 2.
Yeah, well, yes.
Yeah.
The sample ballots are always a thing. They're always headline fodder more than anything else, in my opinion, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Complete unknown. Any last talking points, folks? This is the last chance to talk about the nominees in specific.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to mention another one of my favorite elements of this movie, which is the camera work and color grading. In this movie, I think are going completely under discussed. I think primarily the color grading, I think is like strangely alluring to me. I find the color palette of dark browns and golds and whites to be really, really unique. And the film feels like very saturated within its own color palette, and especially the way in which it uses bright lights on a lot of things. So we get a lot of rays of sunlight either coming from like backfilling the sets or coming down from spotlights or whatever.
Yeah.
And then we get like some like speckling dust in the performance or like caught in the spotlight. And I don't know why it came to my mind. The color grading and the production design being such these browns and golds and stuff, it reminded me of like the wood paneling of a guitar. Like if you put a camera inside of a guitar and you looked up through the strings, it's like this sunlight coming through the hole of the guitar, and you get this like dust in the sunlight and the like browns and golds, and like this like it feels very warm and enveloping.
It's very nostalgic feeling. It lends itself to the set dressing of the time, and all that stuff is very intentional. The wood paneling feeling, the leathery richness of like the 60s is all very well executed. Like I said, technically a very proficient film.
Definitely.
Well, Abram, you got a thought? Abram, you got a thought? You can give it.
Yeah, it's not really analysis. I just
All right.
It's gotten me quite interested in listening to Dylan's music. I've listened to Freewheelin' and Highway 61 revisited quite a bit. That's just to me very high praise for a film like this. It's something Timothee Chalamet talked a lot about in interviews. Sort of the way that Bob Dylan is not a figure that for our generation is held in the same reverence or has the same cultural position, in that he hoped through a complete unknown he could expose more people to the music and poetry and ideology of Bob's music, and for me he certainly has. So to me that's just a really, I think, maybe the highest praise I could give the film.
Yeah. It makes him intriguing, I think. We talked about Bob as a character and sort of fits and spurts, but I can't help but think back to the opening of this opening of this discussion, where we're like, yeah, the movie's not really about Bob, or Bob's not really the at the center of it, or whatever.
And yet we spent the whole discussion talking about Bob Dylan.
Well, yes, and we're more.
Well, I think it's just because it's his art is, to me, the focus of the movie, and the way that his art through him impacts other people, impacts his dynamics with other people. And for me, it's more of like an example of art and an artist, of what is your process as an artist. How do you let your artistic process be influenced by others or intend to influence others? How do you react to the social pressures that are put on you as an artist? And then how, as if you're someone that has an artist in their life, how do you support them? How do you make sure that you're balancing like their fame with your own needs and things? And so I think it's still not as much about Bob Dylan as it is about the idea of an artist that has all these complex feelings and the inspirations of being an artist and stuff like that. Like that's really where the thematic resonance comes for me, is in the ways in which people interact with art and an artist interact with their art. I think it's very fascinating.
It'll just be interesting to me that this one will from henceforth be remembered as like the movie about Bob Dylan, though.
Yeah, the movie about Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
Anyway, go watch I'm Not There or Inside Llewyn Davis, also a good pseudo Bob Dylan movie.
Tanner,
well, I'm still here.
You wanna give us some nominations for this while we pull up our scorecard?
Timo, I'm so glad you asked. So, as we've this film's nominated for Best Picture, naturally. It's also nominated for Best Director for James Mangold, snuck in there. Nominated for Best Lead Actor for Timothee Chalamet, putting up a bit of a fight here at the end of award season. Could come away with that Oscar. I don't think so.
I think so.
That side eye glance said no.
I've got Demi and Adrian is who I've got currently. Anywho's will be. It is also nominated for Best Supporting Actress for the performance from Monica Barbaro. It is nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. It is, of course, adapted from the book Dylan Goes Electric, because it's got an exclamation point at the end. It is also nominated for a few techs, such as costume design and sound, and that's it.
Yeah. I think that's
Healthy.
a pretty well-rounded slate of nominations.
Yes.
Okay. Tanner, put your score in and let's find out where this puppy goes.
I'm sorry. Hang on. Do that.
Do that, why don't you?
Oops. Oh, I hit enter.
Oh,
Well,
spoilers.
Why don't you?
Tucker's showing his hand. Okay, everybody else, 3, 2, 1.
No one edit theirs based on mine.
Nobody edit yours. Alrighty, we have a score. This film is going to get an 8.6. So that's going to put it just above The Substance at spot number 5. So the best musical on our list. Now, drumroll please, because I will be reading the list to you from bottom to top. At
Exciting.
the bottom with a score of 4.1, Amelia Perez. Then Wicked with a 7.0. Then Anora got a 7.7, the first one we reviewed. I'm Still Here got an 8.3. The Substance got an 8.5. A Complete Unknown, as we talked about today, with 8.6 at spot number 5. Spot number 4 goes to Conclave with an 8.8. Brutalist is at spot number 3 at 8.9. Nickel Boy spot number 2 at 9.4. And Dune Part 2 at spot number 1 with 9.6. So there you have it.
Zowie.
That's what we think of the awards this time around. What will the Academy pick? I don't know. I don't really know.
It is.
Haven't seen it yet.
It is
I don't know.
honestly the hardest
I
to
don't know.
predict since
Easily.
we've started doing these.
Easily.
Isn't it just gonna be a Nora though?
I got money on Anora. I don't literally have money, but like if you want to go the safest
I might
pick,
put
the
some money on it.
If you want to go the safest pick, it'd be Anora based on precursors. Number 2 is Conclave, though. Like that's kind of how it's shaken out.
Unfortunately, we're getting news out of the Vatican that the Pope is maybe.
Well, yes.
The Pope is in ill health, and so
Oscar
Congress
voting
could help him.
already closed though. So
True,
even if the old guy kicks the bucket, he
Even
kicks
if the
the old
conclave-
hat, as it
even if
were.
the Conclave movie becomes documentary and not fiction.
That will make a whole heck of a lot of an impact. But no, yeah,
I'm excited to see.
I'm just trying to think. The year before, we reviewed individually all the Best Picture nominees the year before Everything Everywhere, right?
2 years.
Yeah.
before.
2 years.
Mhm.
We did the year
we
of
did
Nomadland
Coda.
individual, didn't we?
Nomadland was the first one we did, and then
Yeah.
Coda won
Yeah.
the year after that.
Yeah,
We did that
yeah.
one too.
So maybe not the hardest to predict since we started doing these.
I don't think any of us got
Coda
Coda.
was a late breaking thing.
That's true.
Um,
Yeah, because it was going to be Power of the Dog. Remember that movie?
I remember that movie.
Oh, I do actually
Good
remember
movie.
that one.
Who the hell talks about Power of the Dog anymore? That movie's gone to time.
No, who the hell
Yeah,
talks about
unlike
Coda,
Coda.
anymore?
That's true, but at least it won.
At least it won. Yeah,
Well,
that's the
another
only thing that matters is winning Best Picture.
is winning. Well,
No, I actually winning the Quest rankings.
Yeah, well, yeah, and congratulations to Dune. I also want to, last thing I'll point out, since we
yes.
had a Timmy-centric discussion, I saw this tweet. This is the third time that Timothee Chalamet has been in 2 Best Picture nominees.
Good God.
In a year?
Crazy stuff. Yeah, in the same year, I should note. He
Prolific
only had
goat.
1 in 2019. Boo.
And we're
Boo.
supposed to be upset that this guy said he wants to be one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah, hey,
Yeah.
I'd argue maybe already he's on his way up. He's on
his-
the ascent right now.
Uh-huh.
Yes, yes.
Uh-huh.
He's a lot further up the mountain than many would want to be.
Well, thank you guys for another year of hitting all the nominees. I'm happy to be an educated Oscars viewer, have my opinions about everything, and happy to share them on the show with y'all and our audience. So thank you for sticking through it. And dear viewers, if we got anything right, if we got anything wrong, let us know in the comments. We want to hear about it. And I want to know what your Vegas odds are on the Oscars this time around. How much you throwing down on the sports bet, on the whatever. The stupid
Whatever,
betting joke has
whatever.
gone on long enough.
On the Gold Derby.
On the Gold Derby. We'll be back with a little movie that we hinted at a long time ago. If you remember
we'll
it,
talk about the winner, of
we will,
course.
of course, we will review the winner, whichever one
Mhm.
does win. And then a little treat, because Francis Ford
treat.
Coppola made a movie a long time ago that we spun on the wheel a long time ago.
Yes.
And in the future, we'll get to watch. That's Apocalypse Now. We're going to have a lot of fun with that. So that's up after we wrap up all this final Oscars business. We'll go back to our regularly scheduled
Hullabaloo.
Palme d'Or viewing. So if Anora wins, we'll just do another Palme d'Or episode. But
Yeah.
if anything else wins, we'll just talk about it like normal. Until then, that's all from me. Stay cool, Keep warm. Peace.